Way through President Trump's first 100 days, the jobs market surges, a health care bill struggles, and turmoil shakes what may be the most dangerous neighborhood in the world. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. 50 days into the Trump presidency, there are growing concerns about how the U.S. will deal with its friends and foes on the Korean Peninsula following the removal of the South's already impeached president from office. That move comes as tensions soar in the region over the North's aggressive nuclear and missile programs and its ongoing defiance of the U.S. and the UN and even traditional ally China, testing missiles that, if successful, might be able to reach the U.S. Correspondent Rich Edson is watching the situation tonight from the State Department. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Bret. And as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson travels next week to address an aggressive North Korea, he will meet with a South Korean government that is on its way out. This is after a South Korean court this morning removed from office President Park Geun-hye after a corruption scandal, as her supporters rallied in front of the courthouse protesting the decision. And acting State Department spokesman Mark Toner says, in the meantime, quote, "We will continue to work with Prime Minister Hwang for the remainder of his tenure as acting president, and we look forward to a productive relationship with whomever the people of South Korea elect to be their next president. This is a domestic issue on which the United States takes no position." And while that domestic issue consumes much of the South Korean government, the acting president says he is still focused on its northern neighbor, its nuclear tests, and ballistic missile provocations. The State Department says the U.S. will continue to meet its alliance commitments, especially with respect to defending against the North Korean threat. And as Secretary Tillerson travels next week to Tokyo, Seoul, and Beijing, he will do so without reporters on his plane. Given the challenges of keeping up with the Secretary of State on a trip with multiple stops, Tillerson's predecessors have invited reporters to travel on their planes. The White House says there is an element of cost savings in the decision, even though news organizations pay to send their crews. And during his time as Secretary, Tillerson has also refused to answer any journalist questions or agree to an interview. In response to all this, Bret, the State Department says that the Secretary will allow journalists to travel in his motorcade and offer support when they come to Asia to cover him, and that he will also be available to ask questions or answer questions from journalists. Fox News will be in Asia for that. Back to you.
We'll cover every aspect. Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, thank you. President Trump, halfway through his first 100 days in office, is touting new jobs numbers as he tries to persuade conservatives to support a new health care bill. But there are new questions about just how far the president is willing to go in Syria and what exactly he wants to accomplish there. Syria is and has been complex and deadly, a foreign hotspot unlike many others we are facing in the world, now with more U.S. troops in the middle of fighting. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is looking for answers tonight on the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Right, good evening to you. The addition of a contingent of Rangers and Marines on the ground in Syria is a dramatic recalibration of our posture in that country, and one that raises a number of difficult questions about the path ahead. The Marines will support Kurdish forces fighting to drive ISIS from their stronghold of Raqqa.
A U.S. Marine artillery unit and a team of Rangers have recently been positioned in Syria to provide a combined joint task force operation, Inherent Resolve. The commander, the agility to expedite the destruction of ISIS in Raqqa in particular.
The troop deployment is not part of the official White House strategy to destroy ISIS. That plan is still going through the review process. While President Trump signed off on the escalation of U.S. forces, Pentagon Chief James Mattis has been given a level of autonomy to battle ISIS that the Obama administration didn't allow.
One of the things that the president has ensured is that the commanders have the flexibility to do what they need to fulfill the mission.
Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California wants the troop deployment stopped. With the support of a single Republican, she introduced a bill today that would block funding for any increase in U.S. troops in Syria, writing, quote, "For more than 15 years, the U.S. has been engaged in an ever-expanding war in the Middle East. President Trump's deployment of combat troops in Syria is the latest front in this endless war." The addition of conventional ground forces raises possible complications for the U.S. America is backing the Kurds, but Turkey, a NATO ally, views the Kurds as enemies. The potential for conflict with the U.S. caught in the middle was illuminated in a Senate hearing yesterday with the chief of CENTCOM.
I think there's a possibility of an impending conflict between Turkey and the Kurds. Do you see that as a scenario that we should be concerned about?
I do, Mr. Chairman, and to that end, we are trying to take actions to prevent that from occurring.
And then there is the thaw in relations between Turkey and Russia. Vladimir Putin and Recep Erdogan appear to have patched up their differences over Turkey's 2015 shoot-down of a Russian fighter jet, meeting together in Moscow. Russia is also closely aligned with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who insists he wants back every inch of Syria, not just Raqqa.
The big problem with Iraq was we never planned for the day after.
Right.
So what are the plans for the day after here when Raqqa falls? Who occupies it?
Part of what the president has done during his first 50 days is issue an executive order on January 28th for the Secretary of Defense to submit a comprehensive plan in consultation with the Joint Chiefs and other members of the National Security Team to defeat ISIS. That is part of that plan.
The Pentagon favors a plan to stand up local forces to hold the city of Raqqa after it falls and to develop a viable plan for governance before ISIS is defeated. But as the CENTCOM chief said, what comes next is a lesson that the Pentagon has learned and relearned several times. Bret?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. What do you think the U.S. should do about Syria? Let me know on Twitter at Bret Baier. You can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/Bret Baier SR. There are some serious questions here in Washington tonight about just how much the president's initial pick for National Security Advisor made it known his past through the vetting process. This comes after word that retired General Michael Flynn was actually working for a foreign government during the Trump campaign. Here's Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen.
2 days after former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn filed new paperwork retroactively registering himself as a foreign agent of Turkey for consulting work Flynn did during the campaign and transition periods for a Dutch company closely tied to Ankara, the Associated Press reported that Flynn had alerted lawyers for then-President-elect Trump about the possibility that he may need to register as a foreign agent. The White House contended the matter had been handled appropriately.
We trust people to fill out the forms that they're required to do so in an honest and legal manner. And in this case, he retroactively filed the forms that he was supposed to do, but we advised him to do what the legal and proper thing was, and that's the right thing for this administration.
24 days into his tenure, Flynn was forced out of the top spot on the National Security Council after it was revealed that he had misled Vice President Pence about meetings Flynn had had, again during the transition, with Russia's ambassador to the U.S. Apprised by Fox News of the retroactive filing by General Flynn, once the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Vice President Pence appeared unfazed.
You're disappointed by the story.
The first I heard of it, and I think it is an affirmation of the president's decision to ask General Flynn to resign.
Yet the vetting process that saw Flynn initially registering under only one of two applicable sets of requirements and led to his second filing this week points up the deficiencies of the Trump administration in filling the sub-cabinet's 4,000 jobs, some 1,100 of which require Senate confirmation.
President Trump is behind. He does not have his full team on the field. He is at 18 confirmed, but prior presidents haven't done all that much better. It really is a crazy system.
Senate Democrats have openly boasted of their success in slowing down confirmation of the president's cabinet nominees. But with that process nearing completion, top White House officials seem to understand the onus is now on them to find the president's remaining staffers.
They're going to happen, and we're working with Senate leadership to make them happen.
Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings drew attention today to a letter he sent to Vice President-elect Pence on November 18, raising questions about General Flynn's work on behalf of Turkish interests. Aides to the vice president told me today the letter never made it above the staff level to Mr. Pence's hands, Bret, and that General Flynn's White House job was announced on the very day that letter was sent.
Okay, James, thank you. Attorney General Jeff Sessions is seeking the resignations of 46 U.S. attorneys who were appointed during the Obama administration. The Justice Department says this is a common practice during presidential transitions. It says many Obama-appointed prosecutors have already left their jobs. But Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein released a statement calling the move troubling. Quote, "I'm very concerned about the effect of this sudden and unexpected decision on federal law enforcement." However, Sessions himself was forced to resign from his position as Alabama Attorney General after President Bill Clinton took office. Now to health care. And more friendly persuasion today from the president to sometimes reluctant conservatives over a plan that many of them want no part of. All this comes as lawmakers on both sides anxiously await an announcement about just how much the legislation might cost. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill again tonight.
In a meeting with 5 House chairs, President Trump praised the Republican health care package advancing in 2 committees. And the president noted the plan would accomplish some key conservative priorities.
It provides states with flexibility over how Medicaid dollars are spent, giving power from Washington and back to local government, which we all want to see. They're going to do a much better job. And the plan empowers individual Americans to buy the health insurance that is right for them, not the plan forced on them by government.
After that meeting, the Ways and Means chairman said by repealing taxes and government mandates, those are GOP victories.
And if you hear nothing else I say today, this is the most important one. There is so much more that unites Republicans than divides Republicans on this issue.
Democrats are demonizing the plan.
It's a job killer. Hospitals will close, jobs will be lost, in addition to the access to care that is there. The Methodists have said people will die because of this bill. People will die.
Earlier, the House Majority Leader was asked about some of the criticism from the right and left, and he tried to sell it as a positive.
Sometimes when you have pushback on one side and the other side from a political spectrum, you might have found the sweet spot.
But House conservatives like Dave Bret of Virginia and Jim Jordan from Ohio have floated blowing up the Senate rules to completely remove Obamacare with one bill.
I'm for doing what needs to be done to make sure that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is completely repealed and replaced with something that is actually going to bring down costs for the families that I represent, and that we all campaign on that simple message, that basic message, and that's what they sent us here to do.
Although the chairman of House Energy and Commerce says making it more conservative, such as cutting the Medicaid expansion sooner, would lose moderate support.
Half the Republicans are in states that expanded, half the Republicans are in states that didn't. This is tough work to get to. I think in our committee we got there.
As leadership types are working to round up votes, one item that could make a difference could come as soon as Monday when the Congressional Budget Office weighs in on the cost and impact of this plan. Bret?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. Now to a story that we've been tracking for several weeks now. The U.S. Capitol Police say they are still investigating a number of congressional information technology contractors who are suspected of inappropriately accessing congressional computers, stealing hardware, and making questionable purchases. One of those is said to be Imran Awan, a contractor who still works for the former Democratic National Committee Chair, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, even though his privileges to access the House of Representatives' IT system have been revoked. It's unclear whether the access issues exposed the House networks to potential hackers or spying. We will follow this story. The economy added 235,000 new jobs in the first full month of the Trump presidency. The unemployment rate went down to 4.7%, even though more people began looking for jobs in February. Stocks were up again today. The Dow gained 45. The S&P 500 took in 8. The Nasdaq finished ahead 23. And for the week, the Dow lost 0.5%. The S&P 500 dropped 0.4. The Nasdaq was down more than 1/10. The positive jobs news today was met by some frivolity at the White House.
Thanks, John. In the past, the president has referred to particular job reports as phony or totally fiction. Does the president believe that this jobs report was accurate and a fair way to measure the economy?
Yeah, I talked to the president prior to this, and he said, to quote him very clearly, they may have been phony in the past, but it's very real now.
So let's get some analysis now from Fox Business Network's Liz Clayman in New York. Good evening, Liz. Very real.
Yeah, listen, this is a blowout jobs report. Big upside beat. Really good news. Any way you look at it. We got 235,000 jobs, as you showed, created in February versus the expectation of 190,000, which would have been a good number anyway. January's number was upwardly revised. Sometimes that happens where they're able to get more information and they have to change the number. This one was upwardly revised for a gain of about 238,000. We had wages climbing. Average hourly earnings popped 2.8%. What does that mean? It means employers are finding they have to pay more to fill positions. It's a tighter labor market. We saw big gains in construction jobs, 58,000 added there. And this was a good news piece, Bret. 28,000 manufacturing jobs sprouted up. There was a downside. Retail's a mess, and it's going to continue to be. It's the Amazon effect that brick and mortar stores are just simply getting killed by the online giant. We saw 26,000 retail jobs vaporized. But overall, look, this number is absolutely enough to push the Federal Reserve to hike interest rates at its meeting next week. So to be forewarned is to be forearmed.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Liz, you know, we've said this is the first monthly jobs report that encompasses President Trump in office. So does he get credit for this strong report?
Well, okay, let me put it to you like this, Bret. In part, perception is absolutely reality. What has he done? He has invited CEOs, small businesses, the unions, coal miners, all of them into the White House. And President Trump has sent a very loud signal that he respects and likes businesses and wants to make life easier for them by cutting regulations. So the perception is out there that we're on our way to better growth. Now, Press Secretary Sean Spicer, after he joked earlier, he mentioned it today saying, quote, the president has inspired a surge of optimism and confidence since his election. So absolutely, you've got that push. But then the experts out there also say President Obama gets some credit for this as well, because under President Obama, we saw 84 months in a row of private sector job growth and a 3-month job average creation of 200,000 jobs per month. So in fact, I think a year ago, February, same month, just a year ago, 237,000 jobs were created. So look, both sides can fight over who should get the credit. But I'll tell you something, Bret, nobody wants to own the paltry economic growth we're still seeing. We're still looking at GDP of under 2%. We need to move that needle. We'll see.
We'll see. Liz, thank you. The scandal over pictures of naked Marines is growing larger tonight. There are indications it may not be limited to just the Marine Corps. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin has the latest from the Pentagon.
I can assure you, if there's accountability to be made, those that are involved will be held accountable.
Marine Commandant General Robert Neller forced to confront a scandal that began with a Facebook page reportedly frequented by 30,000 active duty and former Marines called Marines United. The site was allegedly used to share nude photos and pornographic videos of female Marines. Now the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, has opened a criminal investigation into the matter.
For those Marines that are watching this or listening, may have been involved in this, if you're participating in this type of behavior in any way, shape, or form, you're not helping me or your Marine Corps.
The perpetrators allegedly egged each other on to hack Instagram accounts, find and share photos, some taken in locker rooms and showers when the women were not aware, others shared by former disgruntled boyfriends. Marines like Erin Kirk Cuomo, who says her photos were stolen a few years ago, making her the subject of degrading comments.
I had private photos of me from my MySpace page, fully clothed, taken off of my MySpace during a deployment in Iraq and used to encourage during tent parties for males that would talk about assaulting me, what they would do to me.
Cuomo set up a Facebook account called Not in My Marine Corps to fight back and encourage other victims to come forward, like former Marine radio operator Erica Butner.
We will not be silenced. As a rape survivor, I can tell you that this exact behavior leads to the normalization of sexual harassment and even sexual violence.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, himself a former Marine, described the allegations as egregious, unacceptable, and counter to unit cohesion. Quote, "We will not excuse or tolerate such behavior if we are to uphold our values and maintain our ability to defeat the enemy on the battlefield."
Now we've learned the same site that shared nude photos of Hollywood stars like Jennifer Lawrence has a military chat room in which other service members have been doing the same. Defense Secretary Mattis has ordered all military service chiefs and secretaries to root out this alleged behavior. Bret?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. President Trump has invited Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to the White House to discuss the resumption of peace talks with Israel. Press Secretary Sean Spicer says the visit will happen very soon. The last round of peace talks mediated by the United States collapsed in 2014. A hearing has been scheduled to try to separate fact from fiction in the ongoing speculation about links between the Trump campaign and Russian officials. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge has new details tonight. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Bret. The Republican and Democratic leadership of the House Intelligence Committee sent a private letter to the Justice Department today requesting all documentation, applications, warrants, or orders that apply to alleged wiretaps of Donald Trump and his team during the campaign. The deadline is March 13th, and that date is significant, coming 1 week before the committee's first public hearing on the Russia investigation. FBI Director James Comey, NSA Director Mike Rogers, whose agency does surveillance, former CIA Director John Brennan, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, as well as former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates have been called to testify. Asked about reports of an odd computer link between a Russian bank and the Trump organization, a law enforcement source emphasized today that when DNI Clapper said they found no evidence of collusion, the findings reflected that computer information. Elements of this story were first reported last fall and then again recently, which may explain the wiretapping allegations, but we simply don't know. A Republican on the House Intel Committee said the March 20th hearing will certainly be eye-opening.
We need to see the evidence behind our government's response to those efforts. So I come from a background that is evidence-centric. I'm not interested in summaries. I can't deal with anonymous sources. I need witnesses, I need facts, and I need evidence.
The witnesses who have been called have firsthand knowledge of the investigation and probably the best insight into where the leaks originated. The committee chairman has not ruled out issuing subpoenas in this case, Bret.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Some of America's largest companies are not waiting around for the Trump administration to come up with a new health care plan. They have come together to make some changes on their own. Correspondent Garrett Tenney shows us tonight.
It's called the Health Transformation Alliance. 38 of America's largest companies, including household names such as Verizon, American Express, IBM, Macy's, and Coca-Cola, banding together to do something that no one else seems to be able: drive down the prices of health care. Like almost anything in business, though, this is about their bottom line.
We certainly would like to see lower prices, but we don't only want to see lower prices. We want to see better care. Because over time, better care keeps people healthier.
Fewer problems means fewer costs for the companies who provide health insurance to their employees. 155 million Americans under the age of 65 get their health care through an employer. And over the last decade, the cost of providing health insurance for employees has gone up more than 50%, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, and shown no signs of slowing down. But this new alliance is hoping to change that by leveraging its market power and combined 6.5 million employees to negotiate lower prices for health care than any single business could on its own. Already, the alliance says it was able to renegotiate contracts for prescription drugs.
We expect an impact of $600 million over the next 3 years in savings on prescriptions. That is going to represent about a 15% savings on average for companies who are in the HTA.
But even if those cost savings continue, the Cato Institute, which advocates the virtues of free market solutions and limited government, isn't convinced alliances like these will do enough.
Business World is keeping a very close eye on the alliance, though, which could easily become the first of many if it's successful. Already, in the last year since the alliance was created, its membership has grown from 20 to 35 of the largest companies in the country. Bret?
Garrett, thank you. One quick clarification for you now. Earlier, we mistakenly said Jeff Sessions was Alabama Attorney General when he was asked to resign during the transition to the Bill Clinton presidency. He was, of course, like the attorneys asked to resign today, a U.S. attorney in Alabama at that time. The political corruption scandal in South Korea reaches the boiling point. Now a new administration will be coming in. How will this all affect U.S. efforts to deal with an increasingly aggressive North Korea? We'll ask the panel when we come back.
An acting president who we have strong relationships with. It's a domestic issue in which the United States takes no position in the outcome of that election. It's up to the Korean people and their democratic institutions to determine the future of their country.
Well, the South Korean president was impeached over a corruption scandal on their way out. That administration is, as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is on his way over there to deal with an aggressive North Korea, on missile testing, a nuclear program. There are a lot of questions about how this all will play out. Let's bring in our panel. Jason Riley, Manhattan Institute Senior Fellow, Charles Hurt, opinion editor for The Washington Times, and Garrett, political correspondent, The Washington Post, and syndicated columnist, Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Jason, thoughts?
Well, many South Koreans feel that they have ousted a deeply corrupt president, and they may be right. The court decision was unanimous to impeach, but it probably couldn't come at a worse time in terms of South Korea-U.S. relations. We've been trying to isolate North Korea. South Korea had been an ally in doing that, but polls show that the opposition that could replace Park wants closer ties to North Korea and closer ties to China, which of course is North Korea's protector, both economically and diplomatically at the UN. So here you had a strong partner the U.S. had in South Korea, and we don't know where that relationship is going to be going forward.
We're deploying this THAAD system, an anti-missile battery, and one of the congressmen up on the Hill concerned about this is Sensenbrenner, Republican, who says to the Washington Examiner, I think that there's going to be an urgency by our military, which I support, to put the THAAD in South Korea before the South Korean election. Jim Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Charlie, I think that there is this concern that this is just going to upset the apple cart here.
Oh, absolutely. This is no doubt a very the largest challenge that President Trump and his team, Rex Tillerson, General Mattis, have had to face. And of course, as Jason pointed out, the reason that they want to get the THAAD missile defense system in there now is because the next administration will likely be a lot less hospitable to the U.S. North Korea is the most unstable nuclear power in the world. The only country they care about is China. And, one of the things that the Trump administration has to deal with is the fact that over the past 8 years, the former president, Obama, didn't do anything to strengthen America's hand against China. And we'll see how well he is able to deal with that.
And as you look at a map of that region, you see all of the countries that are directly involved in one way or another right there. You have South Korea, you have Japan. China obviously is concerned about North Korea possibly falling apart. And all of these people flowing across the border into China.
Right. I mean, China's interest in protecting North Korea is not necessarily all friendly and benevolent. They are worried about a desperately poor and deeply unstable country on their border. They want to make sure that they don't have a giant refugee humanitarian crisis on their hands. They don't want thousands of starving people coming over the border. And they also want to prop up a fellow nominal communist nuclear-armed regime because the consequences of not doing so are far worse in their view. Covering
state, have you seen what is being portrayed as a weakness at state, or somehow the White House is looking at state as somehow not empowered, despite the fact you have this Secretary of State who is used to be the head of a company that was the size of a country?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know yet. The signs certainly are not good for an empowered State Department acting as a forward, kind of forward deployed American diplomacy, and a Secretary of State to match. People thought that Rex Tillerson certainly would fill that bill, as Trump is certainly known to like having camera-ready cabinet officials and people with business experience, and he clearly had all that, knows the world. Didn't do as great in his confirmation hearing as people thought he would, but still acquitted himself well. But once in office has not really asserted himself in any way. So, we don't know.
Yeah.
And the budget, certainly, numbers, leaked budget numbers are a very bad sign from the State Department's perspective.
Charles.
The worrisome thing here is the outside partner. This is not just a three-sided game, North Korea, South Korea, and the U.S. It's the Chinese reaction. And the Chinese are watching as the United States, after 8 years of withdrawal, accommodation, and essentially no response to Chinese expansion, are seeing the United States now asserting itself. The USS Carl Vinson, an aircraft carrier, is now in the South China Sea. Trump has just sent B-52s into South Korea as a way to threaten the North Koreans. And everyone knows what they carry. They carry nuclear weapons. But the worst thing from the Chinese point of view is the THAAD. This is the anti-missile system. The Chinese react to that the way the Russians did to the anti-missile system we wanted to put in Eastern Europe. They get very upset because it can be applied against them. Yes, our reason for doing it is to defend the South Koreans against the North, but the overall effect is to put up a missile shield that could degrade and weaken the Chinese arsenal. They know that. They're very worried about that, and they are getting semi-hysterical. Global Times, which is a government-friendly publication, just this week said that the government of China will no longer rule out a first nuclear strike. That's a big deal. That's not an official statement, but it tells you how much the Chinese are upset, which is why we are now rushing to install the THAAD by the end of April before the election. So at least it's a fait accompli. But this is a tinderbox.
He's right. The Chinese foreign minister put out all kinds of statements, Jason, about this THAAD going to South Korea. And yet we are supposed to be interacting with China to prevent North Korea from being the crazy one. I want to read real quickly New York Times article 2, really detailed. But Trump's aides say everything's on the table. China recently cut off coal imports from the North, but the United States is also looking at ways to freeze the Kim family's assets, some of which are believed to be held in Chinese-controlled banks. The White House is also looking at preemptive military strike options, senior Trump administration officials said, though the challenge is huge given the country's mountainous terrain and deep tunnels and bunkers. Putting American tactical nuclear weapons back in South Korea, they were withdrawn a quarter century ago, is also under consideration, even if that step could accelerate an arms race in the North. I've been told, Jason, that China, when they say they cut off the coal imports, they had already gotten their quota of coal, so by saying that they were doing that really didn't mean anything big. But there are no good options here.
No, and up until yesterday, the one thing we did have was a strong ally in the region, and that's what's so scary now. We really are flying blind. We don't know how the political situation will play out there. North Korea continued. We had Kim's, the assassination of his brother in Malaysia recently. You have North Korea firing missiles into the Sea of Japan. I mean, this is an incredibly unstable situation, and we've lost our strongest ally there, and that's what's most worrisome. I think the administration is flying blind somewhat right now. They'll have to make it up as they go along.
And they also have not all the positions filled, Charlie. I mean, under the top ones, there's a lot of hollowness.
Yeah, and all across the entire administration. But it does underscore the importance when you have a place that is as unstable as this, the importance of sort of doing little things every step of the way so that they don't become big things. And now we have a big thing on our hands, and it's, as you say, no good options.
Same in Syria.
Yeah.
Next up, the Friday lightning round, jobs, healthcare, and Michael Flynn. Former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn has filed with the Department of Justice as a foreign agent for making more than $500,000 as a lobbyist, essentially, for Turkey. Doesn't that mean, Mr. Vice President, that even if he didn't lie to you about what the Russian ambassador said or didn't say, that you would have had to fire him anyway?
Let me say, hearing that story today was the first I heard of it. I think it is an affirmation of the President's decision to ask General Flynn to resign.
Do you have an attorney calling the transition saying that the person who is in line to be the National Security Advisor may need to register as a foreign agent, and that doesn't raise a red flag?
No, it's not a question of raising a red flag, John. It's a question of whether or not they gave them the advice that they're supposed to. I believe that everybody has done what has legally been required of them.
We will start the lightning round with that. The realization that the former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, retroactively registered himself as a foreign agent working for Turkey as a consultant, even as he was with the Trump campaign and ahead of this vetting process to get into that position. We're back with the panel. Jason.
Well, let's hope. I mean, it sounds like Flynn was going to be shown the door. It was just a matter of when it was going to happen. But I hope the administration did a better job of vetting other top officials. But Bret, what's striking here is that even after this controversy, all the officials in the administration don't seem like they're on the same page. You have Spicer, the White House secretary, press secretary, still calling Flynn's credentials impeccable. And then you have the vice president telling you, well, there's a reason we fired him, Bret, essentially. Why aren't they speaking with one voice on this in terms of communication about what happened?
Charlie?
Yeah, at the time that he got cashiered, there was sort of a lot of questions. Well, that was pretty quick because this is an administration that, they like to have their fights and fight them. But I think we're seeing now part of the reason why they probably were so quick to get rid of him. And it's a real problem, and obviously they're going to have to deal with questions going forward about this. But I would imagine that even for $500,000 from President Erdogan of Turkey to lobby on his behalf, he probably did not accomplish as much as President Obama did over the past 8 years, promoting Erdogan and working with him.
The AP reported that Flynn had alerted lawyers for then President-elect Trump's team about the possibility that he may need to register as a foreign agent, and I guess that's where the whole back and forth at the White House happened today.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I don't really know. Did they know ahead of time that he had this gotten $500,000 essentially from Turkey? It's a company, but it's a very close
state run.
Close to the president. The AP story says at least some people at the White House knew, but other people at the White House have said they didn't know. At the very least, Flynn should have told them. Right? It very clearly told them, look, if I'm being considered for this job, you need to know that I did $500,000 worth of work for Turkey last year. You might want to know that.
Yeah, Charles.
And it wasn't just last year. Look at the timing of this. The contract ran from September to right after Election Day. That's the height of the campaign. And remember that after the convention, Trump begins to get the national security briefings. Flynn is getting them. He's on the inside. He's not a private citizen, essentially. He really is somebody who's attached to a man who could be the president. And he goes on with this kind of contract, publishes on Inauguration Day, I think, a piece on behalf of the Turks. What in God's name was he thinking? There was no way he could have survived. It's really hard to understand how they chose him in the first place.
All right, quickly, jobs numbers. February jobs report, the economy added 235,000 jobs, and unemployment was down 4.7%, down from 4.8%.
I think that I'm tired of winning already.
I'm leaving it there. That's too good.
Well, I can't top that. No, I mean, it is funny to after months and months and months of Trump rubbishing the numbers as a candidate for the way they're collected, they don't count enough people. The whole thing is fake and terrible. But now they're great.
Yes. All right. Quickly, healthcare. Do we see any developments here that this healthcare bill is somehow they are somehow twisting arms, Charlie?
It's going to be tough, and I think that President Trump, the smartest thing he could do is to make a pitch for Democrats and go to the Hill and actually work to try to win over, peel off some Democrats to get at least so that if and when it fails, Democrats they can blame Democrats for the failure. But I think that hoping that just Republicans do it, it's going to be a tough one.
Jason,
that's going to be tough. I mean, I think Republicans, and they know this, particularly in the Senate, they are going to own they own health care now, and if this blows up, it will be on them. They will own every horror story coming down.
Let me just interrupt you. They now control the House and the Senate and the White House.
Yes.
If it doesn't blow up, if they don't pass something, don't they still own it?
Yes.
So they own it either way.
Yes, they own it. That's the point. They own it. And they have to decide, particularly the conservatives, have to decide whether they want to fix this thing or blow it up, and whether the status quo is preferable to this compromise. That's the decision that they have to make. And no one has ever accused Donald Trump of being a conservative purist. He wants a deal, and he's willing to deal. And the question is whether other Republicans will get behind him.
Will it?
Yes, I think in the end they're going to have to, because otherwise it's mass suicide. I think Trump signaled which way he's going when he backed Paul Ryan on the major sort of the index issue of, do you, on the Medicaid, are you going to stop the expansion now or in 2 years? The conservatives wanted right away, which would be political suicide. Trump has made the right call. He backs Ryan on this. And I think in the end they're going to have to walk over. They're going to have to strong-arm the conservatives. Otherwise, the presidency is going to be terribly injured if they are defeated.
When we come back, winners and losers for the week. It's Friday. Time for winners and losers. Back with the panel. Jason.
My winner of the week is Vladimir Putin of Russia, who now has a surprisingly large number of, or amount of the political right here in America defending Russia to give cover to Donald Trump. So I think Putin is sitting at home smiling right now. My loser of the week are the nitwits criticizing Ben Carson over comparing immigrants to slavery, something that President Obama did any number of times without raising nearly the same amount of fuss.
Charlie, winner and loser?
My winner are the people that supported Donald Trump. He ran on a very simple campaign, and we have jobs up, illegals crossing the border down. That's a pretty significant victory this week. My loser of the week are all those moms who had to scramble to find daycare for their kids who couldn't go to school because the teachers didn't go to school.
Ann, winner and loser?
So my winner of the week is South Korean constitutional democracy. I know Jason thinks we lost a big ally there, and certainly there's an open question of what kind of government will replace Pak. But the people have spoken. This is a country only a generation removed from dictatorship, and it was popular pressure that forced her out. And my loser is repealing and replacing Obamacare. It is going to be a whole lot harder to repeal and replace it with anything than Trump suggested as a candidate, and certainly what we saw in Congress this week shows that.
Charles.
Loser, CIA, they lost the codes. It's all in WikiLeaks. Can't anybody here shoot straight. Winner of the week, Team Israel, the Israeli baseball team, believe it or not, one of the finalists in the World Baseball Classic, first-time qualifiers. They've won all their games. They're undefeated. They are amazing, everyone. Not since Sandy Koufax. And you thought all our people could do was finance.
Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. Fair, balanced, unafraid. Make it a great weekend. Way through President Trump's first 100 days, the jobs market surges, a health care bill struggles, and turmoil shakes what may be the most dangerous neighborhood in the world. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. 50 days into the Trump presidency, there are growing concerns about how the U.S. will deal with its friends and foes on the Korean Peninsula following the removal of the South's already impeached president from office. That move comes as tensions soar in the region over the North's aggressive nuclear and missile programs and its ongoing defiance of the U.S. and the UN and even traditional ally China, testing missiles that, if successful, might be able to reach the U.S. Correspondent Rich Edson is watching the situation tonight from the State Department. Good evening, Rich.
Good evening, Bret. And as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson travels next week to address an aggressive North Korea, he will meet with the South Korean government that is on its way out. This is after a South Korean court this morning removed from office President Park Geun-hye after a corruption scandal, as her supporters rallied in front of the courthouse protesting the decision. And acting State Department spokesman Mark Toner says, in the meantime, quote, "We will continue to work with Prime Minister Hwang for the remainder of his tenure as acting president, and we look forward to a productive relationship with whomever the people of South Korea elect to be their next president. This is a domestic issue on which the United States takes no position." And while that domestic issue consumes much of the South Korean government, the acting president says he is still focused on its northern neighbor, its nuclear tests, and ballistic missile provocations. The State Department says the U.S. will continue to meet its alliance commitments, especially with respect to defending against the North Korean threat. And as Secretary Tillerson travels next week to Tokyo, Seoul, and Beijing, he will do so without reporters on his plane. Given the challenges of keeping up with the Secretary of State on a trip with multiple